Uh, Thanks a lot, Veena, for a wonderful presentation on the problems of interpreting in tourism, and certainly for newcomers and a person who is making a new entry in the field, it must be very challenging to cope with language, cope with situation, cope with new tourists and new knowledge. I mean, you have to lots of things going on simultaneously, and the person who does not give up, they survive, and those who give up, they never come back into interpreting activity at all. So this is something that we as a linguist should understand, and I mean, certainly, there is a lots of point that comes into picture, especially the one is related to training programs, specifically for interpretation. Unfortunately, except for one or two universities, there are not enough facilities available. We do not have enough labs. There is a scarcity of trainers, and people who are from language background, in spite of the fact that they want to do something in interpreting, they are not able to take it as a profession, and we end up doing lots of experiments, and that many times results in unprofessional activity and creates bad image about our language profession and interpreters community, in fact. So keeping that factor into consideration, I believe it was a very good and informative talk. So I would like to open the floor for questions and see if Mrs. Veena can answer some of your questions. Okay, so my friends, the floor is open. Anybody, any questions on interpretation? Of course, I understand people do not have background of interpretation, so maybe later through our community learning program through YouTube channel, I will post some lectures on interpreting. Recently, we have done a very successful, training programs, a very ambitious program for a big media house called G News. They have their own channel. So now they have 10 highly trained interpreters. Fortunately, I trained them, and it was a very good project for me and good learning experience. So maybe, I will try to bring those lectures back and put it live, but that will take time. But before that, let's ask some questions on interpretation, tourism one, consecutive one, or general simultaneous interpretation. Anybody, any questions, please, welcome.
Mrs. Veena, I have a question for you. As you said, you have categorized into 4 categories. Basically, I would like to emphasize on the category where the interpreter is the local one and the tourist come from other culture. Yeah. Okay. And let's say the example which you gave us was of there is of some other culture as well as the tourist is of the other culture, that Lak Chudi Manga. But let's say the interpreter is a local one. While doing the interpretation, as I have not formally got education of the interpretation, but I have little bit knowledge about it. And while doing interpretation, we always keep a word as it is. We never translate it. For example, let's say chapati, yeah, because chapati has its cultural meaning in India, and it doesn't exist in any other culture, as far as I know. And because it has a cultural meaning, so there the problem arises of translating the word into an English word or in some other language. So So where in this case, what would you suggest? What kind of interpretation or translation should an interpreter look for?
Excellent question, actually. Here, when you come across something like this, I would suggest that you retain the
Yes.
word chapati and you don't change the word,
Mm.
but you explain it to others by probably explaining the process of how it is prepared. Then they would probably tell you, hey, in my country too, we have something like this, where we mix the dough and we create something that is circular, and then we make a, we flatten it out on the surface. So, which means your understanding of how a chapati is made should come quickly to your rescue there.
Yeah. Okay.
This is something that the tour guide might not tell you.
Mhm.
You probably didn't, he will not probably think of explaining what a chapati is, but it might be your job to explain to the third person, that is the tourist, what a chapati is, which means you should have ready knowledge about what a chapati is. Maybe you're from the south and you don't eat chapati at all. That's not your food, your daily alimentation. So you probably would wonder what exactly to say then. So here that becomes a challenge.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So the best way would be to probably liken it to something and say, it is round. It is like your crepe in France, or maybe like a pizza base. It's
Yeah.
prepared the same way. So liken it to something and manage.
Uh-huh. Okay. Thank you so much.
Ma'am, it's me, Gargi Durgan this side, and
Sure.
I wanted to inquire something. So, ma'am, when we have some difficulty regarding the interpretation and we need some patience and all, so is it like the visitors who have visited that place, they show their cooperation and they actually,
I'm not able to hear you too well. I'm so sorry.
am I audible this time, ma'am?
Not really. Sorry.
Gargi, the best thing
Probably
would be
Kagi placing the mic
if
near
you are
you.
not able to.
Yes, perfect now. Yes, thank you.
So, ma'am, I was asking that suppose we are there for the interpretation and we couldn't find a word or something, and we get hope. The visitors that who have visited us, and are they going to show us some cooperation or something so that we might not get hopeless? I mean, what's the reaction of the visitors over there?
Very good question. That's again, something that you can't predict. There are some people, most of them, in fact, most of the tourists are very sweet. They're very friendly. They don't try to, see, their idea is not to trouble you or put you in a corner. Their idea is to understand the culture. Now, this is different from simultaneous interpretation, where you are supposed to know your information. You must have your information. You cannot get away with saying something that's not correct, because their information is important. It has to go out in the right way. Whereas in a consecutive interpretation, you have a little bit of time, and generally people are friendly. But again, it depends on the context. See, there was one interpretation which I did that was for an adoption process. So there were times when I had to have my legal information and all that absolutely correct. So I had to carry a dictionary with me. I had to do a lot of reading beforehand, make sure I had all the technical terms and all of it. At the same time, there was the other side, where the human side, where we were interacting on the social side, where things were familiar, but there were things that I didn't know, and people were understanding that there was no problem. Asking them for time and then checking something and getting back, or getting around with definition. So that was the challenge. So it again depends on each person. Again, I wouldn't call it culture based or cultural context and all that. I would say each person is different. There may be some who, most of them are very friendly. Most of them are very cooperating. So no problem.
And as for a conference interpretation or something, when we are doing simultaneous, in that case, what should we do if we don't get a word or something?
Generally, if I understand right, there are people, who take turns. So you could probably quickly note down and ask the person sitting next to you. Or generally what happens is here the context and information is given to you beforehand, and you do your homework, you prepare completely, and that's how it is done and simultaneous. And consecutive is the one that where you're not prepared for the information. It can throw up something that is completely unexpected.
Okay, thank you so much.
Madam, I have a question.
Sure.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Question is, you are mentioning one traveler, one guide, and one interpreter.
Okay.
Suppose there's a group of people with multicultural, multi-background,
Yes.
then how do you deal with that?
Okay. Again, an interesting question. Because the interpretation groups that I have seen, most of them, when they have a big group, they generally divide them based on language. So there is an interpreter who speaks a particular language and they go with that particular group. And if you are going to have a multi-linguistic group with just one guide, they need to have a common language. Otherwise, it's going to be quite challenging. I think there the interpreter should be able to set expectations and tell them, see, this is something that I'm not prepared for. If you're okay with the fact that there may be times that I might not know the word or not be able to explain it in some other language, you should be ready for it. Now, for example, if you're doing an interpretation where you have an Italian, a German, and a Portuguese person together, and you are basically a German interpreter, how would you know Portuguese and Italian? You're not expected to know that. You will not be able to do your research in the given time and become a linguist overnight with a B2 level or a C1 level. So there, your expectations have to be very clear. You have to tell them beforehand, I'm an interpreter who does only German interpretation. The others, I will explain it to you in English. If you understand, it's your good luck.
Very good.
Well,
Now, second point is a suggestion. Why don't we start interpretation course for tourism through ministry, or there are so many associations? Can they not take a lead? Because they are the people who face the brunt. I think Ravi Kumar can take a lead in that and do a course, regular course, with the help of ministry. I don't know the practicability of it, but then just a suggestion.
see, again, when you talk about the ministry and all that, everything gets centered around Delhi. That's one of the biggest challenges. So I think we've done in different states, different regions, so that people get an exposure to all the information around India and they're able to interpret wherever they are and not just in one place.
Right.
I think that's something that we are looking at, and I'm sure we'll find a solution soon to this this big challenge that we have in India.
You will hear about new courses soon, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Look forward. Because I don't do interpretation, I don't do translation, but I eagerly look forward some developmental activities.
Right. Do any other questions we have?
So I have a question.
Yes.
Hello.
Who is there?
Who's got a question? Swastika, is it?
Yes. Yes. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Ma'am, I wanted to know, is cultural immersion the sole way to develop language proficiency? As Gargi faced a problem in interpreting a single word from one language to the other, how can we overcome this problem or this difficulty? Can you please give us some suggestions?
See, cultural immersion is going to give you an idea about the language. Cultural immersion will basically teach you about the culture, the different behavior patterns and what to expect and what are their customs and traditions and all that. Language is the means to explain, to communicate to another person about what happens there, or to yourself be able to understand. So a cultural immersion is not going to teach you everything. You need to have a combination of both.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions we have, please? Nicoletta, anything you have? How do you handle interpretation in Italy?
No, it's okay. Hello. Good evening. No, I have no question. Everything is really very clear. It was very clear for me. It was also the same problems I encountered sometimes when I was called for guiding some small tour, some groups. And for Sardinia is a little bit different from many other Italian regions. So I had to explain in details what some words meant. But it's okay. No, nothing else. Thank you. It was very, very nice and very interesting to participate and to join this section. Thank you, Mr. Veena.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, so Veena, may I ask you one question?
Sure.
See, there was some questions related to cultural immersion, understanding. I recall I being a guide, tourist guide, when I was a student of undergraduate course. And for me, every interaction with a new tourist was a learning experience. Every time I used to have a new situation. Sometimes, for example, it happens, people come with, some stereotypes. So there was a tourist I recall from Spain, and an elderly lady. So she had visited India before, and she had at that time visited without any tourist guide. And she hired a taxi driver who was her tourist guide and the person who takes her around. And she spent around 1 week time with her, with him, and he took her to variety of places. And after 7 days, she realized that the taxi driver was cheating her while taking her to shopping, etc., taking commissions, persuading every time to take her to shopping, right? So with that wrong notion, she went back to her country. And when she came back, she was carrying forward that, fear. So when she interacted with me, she took me as if I was the same person, again going to cheat her. So it took me around 7 days time to convince her that not everybody is the same. Finally, she was convinced, but for 7 days, it was my painful days of a whole life, because every time you talk about something interesting, something, which she could cherish, she used to take it as I'm, taking her to shopping, and I will cheat her again and take commission, etc. So in that kind of a situation, how these newcomers handle such situations? Have you come across any such cases?
I've not had anybody having a problem with me as such, but I've heard of people complaining, that the attitude right at the beginning was not all right just because they had a bad experience earlier. I think one thing for us as when we go there, tell them that no two fingers are alike. So the first question to ask them when they confront you with some bad experience and say you probably are also the same kind of person, is to ask them, do you think all the people in your country are similar? Every person who comes here, is he the same? So it can never be a yes to that answer, right? So similarly, just because somebody else has cheated you, it doesn't mean that I will be cheating you. And second thing is, I think telling people that you are an accredited interpreter with certain credentials will make it all the more authentic for them.
Yes, it makes a difference, right?
Yeah, it makes a difference.
Any other questions, my friends? Do we have anything else?
If I may say so, I think Ishan was asking about opportunities.
Yes, Ishan. Yeah, please.
Ishan, would you like to ask me anything about opportunities in interpretation? You're on mute, actually.
I was asking about the opportunities after masters.
After masters.
Yeah.
All right. So anytime you want to do interpretation, first of all, the most important thing is to equip yourself in the language in which you're going to interpret. But it's also important to check whether you know the other language equally well. Now, English being one of the most important languages here through which we interpret, I think you should also test yourself to see if you have similar, proficiency in English, so that your interpretation goes smoothly. All right. So once that is done, you've got a bilingual certification. Then the third step would be to make sure that you get your interpretation training in place and you get certified. So these are three very important things that you should look at. And once that is done, opportunities are plenty out there. I'm sure there are people waiting to lap up people who are, experts, who can deliver a good interpretation and who are certified. So then there is no fear of coming across somebody who's not going to give them.
Thank you.
Any other questions, my friend? Okay, so there is no further questions. Veena, could you like to give last closing advice to people around who have some interest in interpreting, especially tourism part?
Definitely. I would say this is one of the most interesting professions, actually, because you get to meet so many different people every time. And each time, every person gives you a completely different experience from the previous one. And it's a great learning experience every day. And it's so exciting because people come and tell you so many stories. You share your own stories. You discover your own culture. You discover another culture. And when you go to a third place, the multilingual aspect comes in and you're learning another culture. And there are so many wonderful things that happen. Of course, it's got its challenges, but then that shouldn't, make you go back. You must go on, as Mr. Ravi was saying earlier. If you stick on, it's going to be a wonderful experience. You just go higher and higher. But if you, get scared and move back, it's going to make it very, very difficult. So I wish you all the very best. And I would also like to thank Mr. Ravi and all of you for your patience and for the lovely opportunity that you've given me to speak before you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veena, for your wonderful time and sharing your experience and a wonderful lecture as well. Hope we will meet again on some other occasion. With this, I would like to thank you all for your time. We'll try and put this video live very soon and share it with everybody. So now the floor is closed. We will be available for next 5 minutes in our conference room. If anybody has anything privately wanted to talk or something, I'm available. Veena should also be available for 5 minutes. And then the conference room will close. Thanks again. Take care. Bye-bye.